Hey there, I wanted to talk about how sometimes God can accommodate our fears. So, the Bible tells us all throughout, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. We're even told in Timothy that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. And so we know that there is a difference between a spirit of fear and a nervousness that can come over you when you're about to have to do something, or a bear's running after you, and all of a sudden you're scared of that. So that's not a spirit of fear. That's different. And I'm not going to talk about a spirit of fear because that's a whole other topic. But I want to talk about how there can be fear sometimes in when God's called you to do something and you're kind of afraid to do it, and how God can sometimes accommodate that for you. And so I just think it's a pretty cool story in the book of Judges. I've been reading a lot in Judges lately, and there's the story about Gideon. Gideon was a man who God raised up to another man that God raised up, or another person that God raised up to rescue the Israelites. And so I'm going to read from Judges chapter 7. And at this point, he had already done a lot of things, and he had already gotten several confirmations from God that God had called him to rescue the Israelites. But I'm going to go to Judges chapter 7, and I'm reading from the Passion Translation. And if you go to if you go to verse 9, it says, "That night, Yahweh, God, commanded Gideon, 'Get up and attack the camp. I am giving you victory over the Midianites. But if you are afraid to engage them, first go down to the camp with your servant Purah. Listen to what they are saying, and then you will be brave and have the courage to attack.' So Gideon and his servant Purah went down and approached the outposts of the enemy camp." You go down to verse 13. "As soon as Gideon arrived, he heard an enemy soldier telling a friend about a dream. He was saying, 'Well, I had a dream of this huge commotion in our camp. I dreamed a round loaf of barley bread came rolling into our camp and leveled a tent. It hit the tent so hard it turned it upside down. And then the tent collapsed on the ground.' And his friend interpreted the dream and said, 'Your dream symbolizes the sword of the Israelite, Gideon, son of Joash. It can't mean anything else. God has given him victory over Midian and our whole army.'" So let me just stop right there. God gives him a command, gives Gideon a command to do something, right? And at this point, God says to him, "But if you're afraid to engage them," he gives them an alternative. So he tells him he could either just go and do what he said, or if you're afraid, I've got something else in plan for you. So he goes, because obviously he's afraid, because he chooses the option that God gives him when he says, if you're afraid. And the option was, listen to what these guys are saying. Go down to the enemy camp and take a listen at what you hear. Then he overhears these two guys talking. The guy has a dream about what is to come, has no idea what it is. The interpretation is given right there to the guy and to Gideon and his servant. And the servant goes, "That's Gideon. He's going to come and take over everything. Gideon, the son of Joash, your dream symbolizes the sword of the Israelite Gideon." And he says it can't mean anything else. God has given him victory over our whole army. So God tells Gideon what to do. But if you're scared, you go ahead and go listen. Go to this camp and listen. Then the guy has a dream, gets the interpretation from it. Gideon hears it. Let's figure out what happens. Then verse 15. "When Gideon heard about the man's dream and what it meant, he fell to his knees and worshiped Yahweh. Then he went back to the Israelite camp and shouted, 'Come on, it's time to strike. Yahweh has given you victory over the Midianite army.'" My God. This man he fell down and he worshiped God. And then he goes back to his soldiers and he's like, "We're going to have victory." Like, God accommodated Gideon's fear in that moment. So there may be moments where God is calling you to do something and you might be a little hesitant. You might be a little scared to do it, to step out and do it. Make sure that you're not being controlled by a spirit of fear. But if you're not, God could be accommodating that fear for you in that moment. He could have the enemy himself reveal to you exactly the plans that he has for you. God has already told you what to do. He could have the enemy confirm it for you. And I'm telling you, do it. Do it. I've heard Joyce Myers preach the message. It says, do it afraid. And I used to have issues with that. But it's not talking about a spirit of fear. We don't move and do things through a spirit of fear. But in this story, God accommodates that for Gideon. And there may be moments where God is going to accommodate that for you and say, okay, but if you're kind of scared, let me give you this confirmation over here. And he'll literally use the enemy to do it. Praise God. I hope that encourages somebody today.